When 20 of our children are shot by somebody who's disturbed, and when it's that easy to get these high-clip magazines that can fire off hundreds of shots in a few minutes, that it's time for us to do a better job on background checks, to get control of these magazine clips, to really crack down on gun trafficking. And so I'm actually optimistic that we can get both done.
Carrying a firearm during a crime, drug crime or crime of violence or other serious crimes, is a mandatory 5-year sentence without parole. Those prosecutions have declined, unfortunately, substantially under President Obama's presidency. Chief, does it concern you that in comparing total prosecutions per month for guns in federal court with those for the per month in 2011, with those for the same period in 2010, the number of filings went down 7.9% and were down 28.8% from 2006 in federal court? Does that concern you?
I believe most of them agree that if America worked harder to keep guns out of the hands of dangerous people, there would be fewer atrocities like the one that occurred in Newtown.
We'd like to see the federal laws that are on the books enforced, I suggest. And with regard to the crimes of carrying a firearm during the furtherance of a violent or drug trafficking offense, those prosecutions declined 28.5% between 2007 and 2011. So I would just say, first of all, we need to make sure we're doing our job there.
The law already requires licensed gun dealers to run background checks, and over the last 14 years, that's kept 1.5 million of the wrong people from getting their hands on a gun. But it's hard to enforce that law when as many as 40% of all gun purchases are conducted without a background check. That's not safe. That's not smart.
Senator, is there any gun regulation, any restriction of gun rights that you could accept, that you could vote for?
Well, sure. I think the fact that we have background checks when people buy firearms and we prevent felons and those with serious mental illnesses from acquiring them, I think those make perfect sense.
So a universal background check is something you could support?
The current state of the law is those background checks are in place when a licensed firearm dealer sells firearms. And I think there's a lot of room for improvement on the quality.
Because 40% of the sales are private citizen to private citizen. That's the loophole we talk about.
Well, except that statistic is actually pretty bogus. It's based on a study before the background checks were put into place. And so that study is highly questionable, that 40%.
I don't know. Wayne LaPierre never questioned that study when I brought up that point. He had a question about the feasibility and collecting records. But there is still a loophole that a lot of people would like to correct.
You know, there actually isn't the so-called gun show loophole. That doesn't exist. Any licensed firearm dealer who sells at a gun show has to have a background check. It's a requirement that applies to every licensed firearm dealer. What it doesn't apply to is personal sales one-on-one. And that's true whether it's at a gun show or not.
Senator Schumer, is this the most likely area of agreement, a universal background check, even more than an assault weapons ban or magazine ban?
I'd say this is the sweet spot in terms of actually making us safer and having a good chance of passing. This is it. Right now, I'm the author of a universal background check bill. I am talking to pro-gun Democrats, excuse me, and Republicans. And I think you're going to see, a very likelihood in the next week or two, a proposal that has broad support for universal background checks. And I would say this to my friend Ted. If you are someone who's not a felon, you go into a gun store, a registered firearm dealer, and buy 20 guns, which you can. He'll do a background check on you. You can sell them to anyone you want, felon or anybody else. else. So there are huge holes in this law. And I would say this. The last time we made progress on the pro-gun safety side was tightening up this law for mentally ill people in 2007. I carried the law, and the NRA actually didn't oppose it. So I think this is the best chance of getting something done, and I think you're going to find much broader support than we ever imagined.
But let me just say at the outset, Captain Kelly, thank you. Thank you for bringing that wonderful, brave wife of yours today to remind us what victims suffer from gun violence, what a heroic figure she is, and what a great pillar of strength you are to stand by her during this entire ordeal and her rehabilitation. We're so proud of her and of you. And I say with some regret, there should have been a hearing just like this, right after your wife, one of our own, a member of Congress, was shot point blank in the face at a town meeting in Tucson, Arizona. I'm sorry it's taken 2 years for us to convene this hearing, but it took Newtown, Connecticut to finally bring us to our senses and to open this national conversation. But I hope that you will extend to her our best wishes, our love, and our support for what she is doing today and what she has meant to all of us for this long period of time.
Better not look into their eyes. That's just the smoke they're blowing.
And now to our newsmaker interview with the Vice President of the United States. I spoke with Vice President Biden this afternoon in the Secretary of War suite at the old Executive Office building in Washington. Are you in favor of federal legislation that would ban the sale of these multi-round cartridges holders?
Jimmy may remember in the old days when I had some real power. I was chairman of the Judiciary Committee. I'm the guy that first passed and wrote the assault weapons ban, and also tried to pass legislation relative to the size of magazines. That is those clips that hold all the bullets that get shoved up into the rifle.
31, well, 31 rounds.
And there's all kinds of them of various sizes. So I as a senator and I as an elected official have been on record as supporting, and we did originally have an assault weapons ban in place. But here's what's going on right now in the administration. There are a number of proposals coming forward that are going to be looked at by the Justice Department and the President will speak to as he takes a look at what some of the suggestions are relative to how to deal with what is deemed by most Americans as not appropriate or consistent with the Second Amendment, which we strongly support. But the President has not made a decision on those at this point, and we're just getting the input from the House and the Senate and others, and the Justice Department is looking at it, and the President, as his spokesman has said, will be speaking to those.
But if the President asks you, the answer is going to be yes, ban them, right?
Well, my advice, as you know, you've been doing this so long, if it's going to have any impact, it shouldn't be delivered to him through a news program.
Gotcha.
It should be delivered to him by me personally.
Why didn't the President even mention that in his State of the Union address?
Well, look, there's so many things. I was asked earlier, why didn't the President mention mental health? Why didn't he mention? There's 1,000 things that could have legitimately been mentioned, and had he 10 hours, you know, or this were going to be 5 states of the union. There's a lot more could have been met.
Mr. President, you told me during an interview that you, Eddie Holder, did not authorize a Fast and Furious operation that allowed 2,000 weapons from the United States to Mexico, and they were in the drug trafficking hands. You know, I think that up to 100 Mexicans might have died, and also American agent Brian Terry. There's a report that 14 agents were responsible for the operation, but shouldn't Attorney General Eric Holder, he should have known about that, and if he didn't, should you fire him?
Well, first of all, I think it's important for us to understand that the Fast and Furious program was a field-initiated program begun under the previous administration. When Eric Holder found out about it, he discontinued it.
By the way, do you know the differences between Wide Receiver and Fast and Furious?
I mean, do I know that they're different operations?
Right. And so do you know the differences, the factual differences between Wide Receiver and Fast and Furious?
Well, I mean, there are a number of differences, both, I think, in scope, both in terms of time. The Bush administration was the one that started Wide Receiver. The Obama administration is where Fast and Furious began.
Are you winging this, or do you actually know?
I know this.
You know this? Do you know that Wide Receiver was done in conjunction with the government of Mexico, and the intention of the plan was to follow the weapons, and neither was there the intention to follow the weapons on Fast and Furious, nor did Mexico know that the United States government was allowing guns to walk into the hands of the cartels.
First question is, the Supreme Court has made very clear with respect to executive privilege, there's not an unqualified presidential privilege. The deliberative process privilege requires that the protected material be both limited to communications occurring before the policy adoption and deliberately reflecting the process by which the policy alternatives are assessed at the highest level. As you know, the President has claimed executive privilege to a broad group of documents this committee has subpoenaed, some of which I imagine that you looked at in your investigation. You've had access to thousands more documents than we have. My first question is, roughly how many of these documents, in your opinion, would be covered by executive privilege?
Congressman, we fortunately didn't have to make a decision about what we thought was or was not within executive privilege, because our decision right at the outset was to ask for all the documents that we needed. We got them, and to include them in the report.
Right, but y'all looked at them.
We looked at everything.
Gut feeling, then, if you can't answer specifically, were there some in there covered by executive privilege?
I don't know that. That was never our call. We were never shared with any information about that.
All right. You noted also in your report that the White House refused to share internal communications with you during your investigation of Fast and Furious. We've noted a connection into the White House through Kevin O'Reilly at the National Security Council. Do you think the White House's refusal to share these documents limited the scope of your investigation, and would this committee be well served by pursuing an investigation in that avenue?
Well, as we noted in the report, and as you know, Congressman, we did not get internal communications from the White House, and Mr. O'Reilly's unwillingness to speak to us made it impossible for us to pursue that angle of the case and the question that had been raised.
So it would probably be worthwhile for us to pursue.
Well, certainly we have sought to pursue every lead we could. So I can just tell you from our standpoint, it was a lead we wanted to follow.